Beautiful. Thanks, Mary. I was on mute. Hey, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to AMA number 36 on the 2nd of April, 2020. We have Art Brock. Art, you're sitting a little shallow there, so we can see the top of your head. There we go. Mary Camacho and myself, David Atkinson. We're going to, I think it worked well last time, just jumping straight into questions. So we've got the first question on deck here. When are we going to, I should apologize to everyone, just with the lockdown, you may hear some screaming or kids jumping into my room. So apologies in advance. Anyway, it's a crazy time at the moment. So first question for you, Mary, when are we going to start our holonodes and be able to log into them?
Sure. So I kind of saw this question coming and have the short answer first, which is we should be able to start testing again with a small group of community members in our staging in about a week and a half. I think we've put a couple of notifications out there on the forum and in Telegram, a couple other places about this. And then after we finish and review the solutions basically to some of these root cause, like these issues that we've discovered that have been blocking our release. So kind of what I want to dive into a little bit more, and a lot of this is actually, if you're a host, you can find a lot of this out on the latest update that we put on the Holo forum. We'll be getting it out more generally to the rest of the larger community in a Medium article tomorrow or maybe at the end of the week. But basically, when we started testing on HoloPorts, or when we got the HoloPort network up and running with everybody registered, we sort of, at that point, we activated some infrastructure that really, for us, allowed new forms of testing, the Holochain apps. When we run HoloFuel on HoloPorts, it's testing integration across a whole bunch of different layers of infrastructure. It's testing the web UIs, the Holo network. It's testing the HoloPort OS, the system software, and it's also testing base functionality of Holochain in ways that our test simulations weren't doing and really couldn't cover at the time. So as we moved from testing in just the test framework in virtualized environments to the physical HoloPorts, we surfaced a lot of issues that weren't previously detectable. Some of these issues were rooted in the implementation of Holochain that's led to some refactoring work within Holochain core. Others were in networking. Some of the issues were actually in the HoloFuel application itself. And then a few other things were related to how HoloPorts update, whereby one of the issues in particular was it would restart the conductors and replace configurations that we really need to be more constant. So, we also encountered just issues also, and we started talking about this recently, related to our DevOps processes. So this is how we're promoting our code from development environments into QA and then out into the public alpha testnet. So sounds like the sorts of things that everybody runs into, right? When you're doing software development and deploying software. And that's true. DevOps and all these, lifecycle processes are normal, but it's not quite normal. It's pretty novel when you're doing it with some of the new architecture that we're working with distributed software and distributed frameworks. So, it's been more of a sort of R&D effort to kind of identify how it is that we really need these processes to work. We just going and implementing things that you might use in a centralized approach wasn't really working for us. We've all done that. We're familiar with a lot of those things. And the same tenets don't always apply. So, the architecture would wind up affecting all different aspects of our environment setup that we weren't expecting. And really, HoloFuel, as our first fully deployed hApp on the network, it's teaching us all these different lessons about how all other Holochain apps are going to need to be tested and deployed. So this is really great. So in the wake of all of the findings, our team's not just working to resolve the issues, but they're also, we're taking this time to distill our findings and our learnings and help to document these things so that other hApp developers out there in the community can really get a lot of best practices from this experience that we're having right now. So, we really hate that there's been these delays, but we know that this testing process is super important. And we're testing both internally, but also with a limited group of community testers that are working with us. And this is just what brings integrity to the whole process and has us know that we're going to get the software built right and tested correctly. So that's about where we are right now.
Great, super, thanks, Mary. I think people will appreciate in the article and others to come, just some of the details around the differences. I think that's so many questions are really like, how can it really be different? And I don't think people unless you're a part of one of the core teams, you don't really get a sense or a feeling. So it's great we're going out to the community devs, but it'd also be fantastic to give more info for people. Okay, so another common question around exchanges and exchange listings, but this one, according to Binance, US, but more the question is, can you confirm your plan for listing HoloFuel once the time comes? Mary?
Sure. Well, we know that there's interest in our project from Binance, and we expect, but obviously we're not Binance, so we can't speak for them, but that once HoloFuel is live and HOT becomes demonstrated as a convertible utility token into HoloFuel, both HOT and HoloFuel will meet the various exchanges requirements for listing in the US. Because I can't tell if the question's really about this being about Binance US and having listings in the US, or if it's really about HoloFuel being listed after we go to beta. So I think both of those things are true, and both of those things are quite possible.
Great. So the next question about Mozilla dark mode, is your aim cooperation with that version of Firefox? So I'll answer this a tiny bit and then Art maybe jump in. Got something inaccurately, but from our conversations with Mozilla, the most important thing that we need to be able to do is to demonstrate that Holochain can be running in the browser, and to do that, you're beginning in their version of like the night mode. So you don't go into Firefox release version, you start integrating with Firefox in their testing versions. So I think and that had been the intention over the last couple of years, and we're just waiting until Holochain is ready enough to be able to, and we've got the right developers who want to begin that work to be able to begin building. Art, is there anything that you wanted to jump in and say about?
Yeah, just basically, Firefox doesn't just willy-nilly put other people's stuff into their program. You basically have to prove it out first, and there's some stages to doing that. They have also some dweb extensions that you can use, and it's our intention basically to be able to show that we can function in conjunction with their distributed web extensions and since we're all built in Rust and everything, that helps kind of grease the slide toward integration, making it clear that any Firefox node could be a Holochain node and run peer-to-peer software.
Yeah, and just a good reminder here of when we're talking through the steps of what this could look like. Even when this materializes, we're not looking for a partnership where you read the fine print and it ends up being, well, actually this organization's never really heard of Holochain. We just did a good negotiation and then they're committing to partner with us, but there's actually nothing behind the partnership. The reason we're explaining it this way is because our long-term intention is that the software is compatible and the visions are compatible, and really powerful peer-to-peer applications are running in this way. So again, for those of you out there who are looking for big brand names and really exciting partnerships and don't mind the fact that the fine print says that there's almost nothing underneath it, I think probably not the best direction to be looking in. Anyway, a question for the actual value of the project. A few days ago, Holo hit 4 sats, making market speculation as the same in reverse way from last year when it hit its all-time high at a similar time. But we as investors need your actual statement and point of view for value of the project Holochain. Will be dependent on close to Binance manipulators as before, or can we expect another trend soon? What is your estimate of the price of the token and value of the project according to the last roadmap? I guess the map can be used in each point to estimate the value of the project. Okay. So if I simplify this, people who bought the HOT token are there's significant concern that the price of HOT is at 4 sats, and what do we have to say about that? And then, so I guess I spend a lot of time thinking about this question and answering it in different ways on Telegram, but there's really what we're interested in is long-term value creation, right? And long-term value is about mass use and mass demand. And we know there's mass demand for compute or for hosting, and for centralized, absolutely, and for distributed hosting, right? We also know there's no other combination of technology, currency, ability to create social change that comes close to solving this problem as Holo and Holochain do. We also know that there's a huge amount of innovation. This has never been done before. Otherwise, there'll be a whole large number of organizations trying to take this market. There's a lot of organizations trying to do cloud and take market share in cloud. So there'll be large number that are possible to do this in distributed cloud. They're just not there at the moment. So there's going to be failures, missteps, mistakes. They all happen. Do we wish they happen? Absolutely not. Do we get frustrated? Absolutely. But it is the reality is that they have happened. Right? So in an environment where you're doing something that's never been done before, and you're trying to create massive amount of long-term value, and you're going through missteps, things going wrong, as Mary just described, there's part of the development process that's very different in the distributed world that we're learning about as the technology is growing and as the applications are becoming closer and closer to launching. So we're not going to be able to support short-term needs in this kind of environment, right? Because we don't have control over the product in the short term, right? We've got a team committed to a long-term vision. There's value for the team in the long-term vision realized. We want these applications out there. We want the shifts for the world to happen as a consequence of Holochain existing. We have community members, developers, organizers that are super engaged because they can see their lives improving as a consequence of Holochain existing. We have hosts that can see there's opportunities for wealth creation and there's opportunities to participate in a new type of network through hosting, right? So long term, all of our incentives are aligned. I see this question as in the short term, what happens? It's because your incentives don't seem to be aligned with mine. And really, of all the complaints and the frustrations, I haven't heard any credible alternative to providing daily updates that talk about the highs and the lows, to build, to release, to communicate what's working and what's not working, and to get there together in the end. So that's my impassioned plea. Art, Mary, anything to add before we go into the next question about documentation? Super. All right, my question regarding Holochain's documentation. Some chapters of the guidebook are missing, as well as on the docs.holochain.love. Is there any estimate on when these will be sorted, Mary?
Yeah, we're doing a little bit of an audit right now with some of the things that are in the Holochain process documentation and also in the communications on the Holochain forum. In trying, as I said earlier, we want to distill some of the learnings that we've had over these last few months of testing and supporting app developers. Right now, some of those in particular related to releases with Holochain, we're revising some of those processes and we're going to get some documentation out there. So the specific one that's asked about here, docs.holochain.love, that's relating to sort of what we call our blessed release of Holochain. So you can definitely count on information being provided about that in particular. Let's see, what else did I want to say about that? ETA, when will those be sorted? I think that's going to be an ongoing process. If there are things if there are people out in the community that want to help participate with any of the documentation on Holochain, especially, reach out, let us know. We've got more to do than we can do all within the team. So, this is an open source project. We definitely are looking for more people who want to participate in that way. So if you have some time or energy, value to add in that regard, let us know. Maybe we can see how to set people up a little bit more effectively to contribute in that way.
Awesome, thank you. One's come up a bit. I'd like to see a demonstration of how Holochain is relevant given the current crisis. And it's something we've talked about a fair bit internally. And one of the major decisions for us was to focus on building, and not to talk about the possibilities so much, but actually just to build and get to release and then see what happens in terms of the current crisis, which we expect to still be ongoing as we're building. So, but Art, from all of your experiences and various adventures and currency designs, can you give us some ideas of how you think it might be relevant?
Definitely. I mean, having infrastructure that is resilient to failures of all kinds of unknown types. I mean, right now we're seeing obviously economic uncertainty and all that kind of stuff. If a centralized company goes away and your stuff was hosted with them, or if there's, I mean, there's a lot of bumps in the road that these kinds of crises can bring about. And so having something that can actually be peer hosted, and ideally, I mean, we haven't unfortunately made it to this stage yet, but you know, I also like to get to the stage where even the internet and reliance on internet protocols is optional. Holochain is transport protocol agnostic. For us, TCP/IP is just one transport layer. We could transport over local area networks or over Bluetooth, or you know, anything that you have the ability to have another node connect with you on, we can connect. And so really looking forward to the time that we also have mesh networks and things that can help people withstand internet infrastructure outages and those kinds of things as well. But for a time like we're seeing right now with COVID-19, not just talking about kind of disaster side of that, but also just the mutual support side of this. We're seeing, I think, a nice emergence of kind of mutual aid networks that have been in existence but are now sort of moving forward to help meet some other people's needs, while some of the existing infrastructure that we rely on, economic infrastructure and supply chains that we rely on, are getting less reliable. Those kinds of things, local resource sharing, mutual aid networks, being able to communicate and coordinate, is exactly where I would love to see Holochain meeting people's needs. And I wish that, you know, we had the whole hosting network live with hundreds of apps that were already doing this on it. And unfortunately, that's not the stage we're at. So as David was saying, we're just trying to keep getting the next milestone out so that we can meet the needs whenever we get those things out the door. Does that address? Okay.
Yep, that's great. And in terms of getting things out the door, Mary, how about the HoloPort Nanos?
Well, okay. Can I step back to the last question for a second? Because I think there's one other place that's really important. And this is actually something that we're all experiencing still as a problem in the wake of, and it's not just the COVID-19 issues, because we've been seeing this happen on the internet now for a long time. But when it comes to one of the things that I in particular think is exciting about Holochain is the way identity can work here in different ways, and how you can have more of that source identification coming through from who really is the author of something when you start building up applications and solutions that are integrated at the level of agents and their direct identity. You know where the information's coming from. And right now we're all struggling with understanding like who really is the owner of or author of a lot of misinformation that's going on out there. So that's another area that I think we could be contributing to. And as Arthur pointed out, we're not quite there. So back to that, where are we question?
Yeah, back to the nanos.
Right. The HoloPort Nano image right now is actually with the manufacturer. They're running pre-production tests on it, and we just don't have a date yet for the production run. But we will keep everyone updated as soon as that starts. And the issue is about predicting shipments, and just really to note the pandemic's having an effect on our shipping, and not necessarily the manufacturing at this stage, because it seems like they've gotten a little bit more freedom to kind of loosen things up on the manufacturing side. but we're just going to keep this in mind, and we're not likely to make any, big promises about what might arrive when, because this is going to be different for every part of the world right now that's experiencing different effects. So.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, this is a question from Solomon here. Oh, this is a long question. So I'll attempt to do this justice. So I've been reading this article on scalability on DHT networks and setting some certain benchmarks that should be aimed for to meet user satisfaction and wider adoption. Benchmarks include systems should scale to tens of millions of active and reachable nodes. Algorithms should account for reduced lookup time and reduced delivery delay. Systems should be able to deal with churn in the order of hundreds of thousands of nodes. In all cases, systems should be able to guarantee 100% success in content resolution. Systems should be able to deal with sudden increase in traffic demand. And there's a link that we can share in the chat if people are interested. So I understand Holochain is building their own proprietary RRDHT. And is RRDHT designed to meet the above mentioned benchmarks or even better? And what's its current progress? And also, Art, maybe you could explain the name.
We have some silly names. I don't know that we can explain the name very well. We joke about it being Roadrunner DHT, like meep meep, or Round Robin DHT, or it isn't. There isn't a solid reason for the name, actually. Sorry. One of our devs has a tendency to just kind of make up initials for things and then try to explain them later. But in terms of the question of these performance benchmarks and such, we certainly intend for our DHT to meet all those criteria. I mean, that's key to our scalability targets for dApps in general. But I want to remind that Holochain is not one single monolithic DHT. Every application has its own DHT space. It is its own encrypted network, essentially. So many applications will never be anywhere near having millions of users with churn of hundreds of thousands and that kind of stuff, like nodes coming on and offline. But the fact that DHTs actually can scale to these levels is exactly why we're doing this, because current dApps can't, right? If you go and look at like stateofthedapps.com, you'll see that even the most used apps, dApps, only have a few thousand users. And even their underlying infrastructure, EOS or Ethereum or whatever, simply can't handle millions of users with churns of hundreds of thousands of them coming and going and that kind of thing. I mean, sometimes even just a peak usage, like when CryptoKitties suddenly started getting popular and that kind of thing, it was maxing out the Ethereum network at the time, right? In terms of its ability to actually handle traffic volumes, and that was with only like 2,400 users. So our targets are actually to be able to compete and exceed both in scale and speed with existing DHT platforms. In terms of what's the progress with that, it's really integrated in with the progress of our networking module, because the RRDHT is really a sharding and routing strategy for our network module. That's essentially what it is, because all of Holochain already it's already designed to function as a DHT, and RRDHT is basically just how we do the routing for peer discovery and routing of information, and then sharding of that and gossip of that. And that's all woven in with our network module. And we have been making some really great updates to our network module from lessons we've learned from Sim2H, our centralized server. It's not server, our centralized network switchboard, which we were using because it was too hard to troubleshoot these peer-to-peer network issues. We actually needed to be going through a centralized spot so we could debug our network protocols. And now we've actually done a lot of that, and Sim2H is working extremely efficiently now. We're, when we run these scalability load tests and stuff with the 7,500 nodes and that kind of stuff, Sim2H is still not like maxing out CPU on one centralized server that it's going through. So we feel like we've actually gotten a lot of the networking connections and routing and all that type of stuff actually debugged. And so the next step is now to take out the centralized debugger and make them go peer-to-peer. And hopefully that doesn't blow apart some of the performance that we've achieved going through the centralized switchboard at the moment.
Thanks, Art. I think Sol will be very happy with that answer. So thank you very much. With what I'm hearing from David on Telegram, it seems that we're getting closer to Holo Fuel being tested. Could we get a rough timeline around alpha? Understanding the complexities, but from a market standpoint, it's an amazing opportunity for Holo to really like demonstrate or stand itself apart right now. And so some rough timelines with testing of alpha and rough estimate when alpha may come to a close, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months would be fantastic. And also love the work with David getting back into Telegram, giving us the reality. Much appreciated. So Mary, could you give us some reality?
Yeah, that must be a fun one to read, David. All the acknowledgements for you on it.
It is. That's,
well, okay, so the reality, I mean, we've been testing Holo Fuel standalone for a while, right? And it's more recently what we've been moving through these last several weeks that is testing it in a fully integrated way. And I think we're approaching a time where the stability of our integrated testing environments are going to let us focus on improving the feature sets instead of working so much on the deploy processes and the infrastructure, because the infrastructure has been a huge part of what we've had to be doing, both in Holochain and in Holo this past year, really. So really, that said, we're not going to hit beta in 3 months. We've got a lot of feature work to do, and once we are feature ready, we'll still have a period of testing that's just required by regulators because of some of the issues we identified in Holochain Core. That we're also doing some refactoring work at some base level features in core apps that are prerequisite. They're not even quite ready for integration. Here's an example. One of the items on our roadmap is KYC. Know your customer. It's how we know who we're working with, both on the host side or on the app provider side. And this is required for regulatory approval. Well, in order to get that feature to what we call a feature ready state, we're dependent on integrated key management, such that hosts' original keys are created from the deep key seed and keys. Then we can bridge into personas for personal identity. Key management, in turn, is dependent on some issues in source chain persistence that we're currently implementing fixes on. And we're prioritizing all of those other dependencies and work that we're finding across the various teams that are working on different products. As Arthur said, it's not one monolithic project, one monolithic product. We're sort of working on a lot of different parts and pieces, and that's what you're seeing when you look at the roadmap. So it's not a simple question or answer on that. And what we're hoping is that as we put this out so that people are testing it, are able to see it for themselves, are able to experience the demonstration of distributed apps, fully hosted, working on infrastructure that has that end-to-end functionality, that actually shows this does work, and that is, for us, it's the demonstration of all the work that we've been doing for the last year and a half that we're working to get to. And I understand it also has to get all the way to market, all the way to beta. And so we don't have an answer for when that will be. And we're working in this process that's very agile. And as we get closer to that feature ready state, then we'll know that we're going to hit that test period, but that test period is critical for us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mary. And also, it's amazing way that you're describing the various levels of dependence. Really nice to hear. Art, wondering if a non-conductor agent is a security threat. This is a topic in the Holochain Dev Talk.
Yeah, I saw that link and went and checked it out. And yeah, what it's talking about is the possibility of somebody just using the Holochain protocol to connect to a node and harvest data, just like suck data out of it and kind of go around and vacuum data out of these things. as if it's a protocol like an HTTP protocol or something like that that just makes open requests. And so I wanted to clarify how Holochain works. We talk about how Holochain isn't one monolithic thing. Each app is its own network, right? The way that that actually works is that when you create a Holochain node, you declare an address into the space. And that space is the DHT space of that particular application. There is encryption that application is running that basically means only nodes within that network can talk to each other, nodes within that application can talk to each other, as well as the act of declaring your address into the space undergoes a validation process, just like all the data undergoes a validation process, peer validation process. And so what this allows you to do is to set up membranes essentially to your space. So for example, let's say you have a Slack type chat app that you have for a private group, a private team in your company or something like that. And you can set the validation criteria to require an invitation code. So if you don't have an invitation code, then if I don't have an invitation code, me declaring my address into the space will actually get rejected if I can't also provide the authorized invitation code in this example, right? So then I'm not actually a node that anybody will talk to. And since all the messages are encrypted and signed by these addresses, if I'm not using a valid address, none of the messages will even decrypt or route, and nobody will interact with me. So there is, in that sense, the ability to have each of these networks be a hard membrane, right? Now, if you don't have any criteria for joining your network, then yes, things on the DHT can be queried by other nodes because that's the way a DHT works. It is a shared database. And that's why we have private entries that can stay on your chain and public entries that are published to the DHT. And we call them public on purpose so that you recognize public entries are data that people can absorb. But they can't do that by not being in your application, by not being a node in your network. They have to have been a node in your network first. And so that's, if you're concerned about people just harvesting data, then you manage the network membrane. And then if you're concerned about the privacy of that data, you don't publish things to the public space that aren't supposed to be public. You keep those as private entries on chains.
Super, thanks, Art. Mary mentioning the staging challenge. Can you break it down for us how this is holding back Open Alpha? So I interpret staging as a preliminary loading of data similar to buffering. Is this close? Looking for a more technical view, but in layman's terms. And are we talking too much lag in the network still?
Right. So let's just start out. I think we mean staging a little differently. Staging is simply our word for the integrated environment that we do the last stage of testing in just prior to releasing to the more widely public host network of HoloPort. So that to our testnet, to our alpha testnet. I have a picture here. I'm not sure if we're showing it, but basically it kind of gives our different environments that we use essentially for development and testing. There's the local dev environments really, because that can be a lot of different places because we're integrating code from multiple teams. We've got, our Holochain core team. Sometimes they've got multiple repos that they're working from and multiple types of code that they're bringing in. Then we also have our Happy team who's building the hApps and the UIs, and we also have our Holo Central team that has the HPOS software and other automations. And so all of these come together in dev test integrated environments where developers are kind of going, well, I need to see how this runs with one of the other team's code. And so that's the first place where we see some integration. But really, we have the next level of integration, which is what we're calling integrated QA environment. And that's the first time where all of it comes together. As we move from developer testing, we have to be really careful with how we continue to test in subsequent environments, because really we need new, Arthur was kind of talking about this a little bit, we need new hash spaces so that for each app, it really is a new Holochain network or DHT. Also, as it gets into this integrated QA environment, which is the third one in our list of 5, it's the first time where we have the most up-to-date code coming from all of the teams integrated into an end-to-end testable system. It's really at that point that we're running both the functional tests and the stress tests on Holochain and on the hApps. And it's where we're gathering the release notes that we can use to communicate what's included, what's new, and that, so that when we take it to the next environment, which is what I'm calling our staging environment, this is kind of the field test with a subset of community testers and other team testers, so that they know what they're doing, so that they start getting a view into what it is they're going to be writing about, how it is that they're going to be supporting the functionality if they're working on our help desk, as an example, or providing guidance out on the forum. And then, I said something here about going back to fixes. Right. Well, this is where we pull all the code in, especially like if you think about Holochain. Somebody had asked earlier about the Holochain release process. So when we get to our integrated QA environment, we're not even on a version of Holochain that's blessed yet. So we're not on the most recent public version of Holochain. So right when we're in that QA environment, Holochain's still going through a parallel process of going through their stress tests and meeting all of their requirements so that they can work for the distributed app users as well. And then all of that comes together when we get to the staging environment, where we actually do the build on the blessed version of Holochain here, and we make it available to that subset of community testers. And that's where we sort of do a preview prior to taking it to more of the public testnet, or eventually what will become a mainnet. So it's complex. And what I was talking about around the challenge really gets at, is our networking configuration, is our SIM2H configuration at each stage set up the way that it needs to be? There's a couple of different issues around, or variables, and Arthur, you might be able to speak to these a little bit more in depth about how SIM2H needs to be set up in each distinct environment. But specifically in each one, we need to have a new hash space or a new DHT, and we need to make sure that we're not having crossover. That is, people who were working with the same node in the QA environment can't just move over into the staging environment, because their source chain can, that's how you can basically get the corrupt data, is that if they're carrying basically transactions on their source chain, or entries on their source chain from one environment that then can't be validated through the gossiping in the next environment, that's where we're going to run into problems, where we have validation errors. And those validation errors are good errors, actually. That's how Holochain's intended to work. We don't want there to be able to be that sort of crossover. We need to be able to go, oh, no, that's an inappropriate node coming into our network, and it shouldn't keep working. Yes. Go ahead, Arthur. I think it's...
Yeah, I was just going to clarify. I mean, essentially, because of the way when you set up a new node, but you're using the same agent key as you used in the last environment where you did a bunch of transactions, right? Then that's sort of equivalent to rolling back your chain, or in cryptocurrency terms, trying to double spend, right? So Holochain actually does fail to let you do that successfully, which it's supposed to do, right? But when you didn't know that that was what you were doing, because you thought you were starting out in kind of a clean space, but you didn't make sure you were in a clean space, and you instead used the same key and started over, but a bunch of other nodes already know about transactions you've done, then they're rightfully saying, hey, there's a problem here because you aren't validating these transactions you've done. And so, yeah.
So that was the staging challenge. And so that's what I'm calling more our deployment process and DevOps process challenge that we've been running into. But it's been super informative. Like I said, the learnings are what we're pulling out and distilling, trying to figure out ways to communicate that, because everybody who's building hApps, if they start doing testing that's more complex, they're going to run into these same things.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ray. I think that's really going to help people build a concept of what's going on in their mind, and release the image will be great. Okay, so three more questions, guys. So questions regarding the verboseness of the debug whilst running agents. I know there's a way to do so with Triorama, but I'm yet to find any solutions regarding running the agents themselves with Sim2H server on the forums. Any tips, Art or Mary?
I'm still muted. Sorry about that. We jumped ahead. Well, I don't know if I'm the best person for this, but the way that I understand it right now, really the level of verboseness is completely configurable. These logs basically are helping us to be able to debug the different layers of our software and our infrastructure, and we get a lot of value. You can change the settings for particular test environments, and we're going to set those differently depending on whether or not you're in a dev environment or a test environment. Or when we get to production into a mainnet. Arthur, do you want to say a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm just not exactly sure if this person is a developer who's trying to turn on debugging, or if they're a host who's trying to turn off debugging. But because there was a lot of logging happening. And by the way, we skipped a question, David. I don't know if you meant to.
No, I didn't, but I'll chuck it on at the end. I just realized, and I was so keen to get the last two questions in, I jumped over one. So I'll add it as the final question.
But what I'd recommend, if you go to the Holochain Rust GitHub repo, there's a set of Holochain 101 docs in there, and there's a conductor logging configuration doc in there, and it'll actually tell you what settings to put into your conductor to turn on or off different degrees of logging. And you can also customize the colors and blah, blah, blah if you want to. But it's, yeah, there can be a whole flood or explosion of logging because there's a lot of this sort of peer-to-peer chatter that happens in Holochain, right? And so that can be overwhelming. And that's why it's intended to be able to be customized this way.
Super. Okay, we're close to time, but we're going to squeeze in a couple of these questions because I think people want to hear. So let's rattle through them. So since the Holo network is not running yet, should I unplug my HoloPort until the next release, or will this break something, Art?
Well, it won't break anything to unplug your HoloPort, but it is useful to us to have a number of these things running. It helps us with some scalability tests we're doing, and we'd like to even be able to get HoloPort set up to be providing test frameworks for app developers so they can do scalability testing for their apps and that kind of thing. And so during this alpha period, Holo hosts are only earning test fuel. They're not earning real Holo fuel, but we're also looking at, for people that did help during this period, could there be some rewards that we could provide that might carry over?
Yeah, we'll share more about this later, but I think it's important.
Yeah, important. And it's definitely important to have the 500, 600, 700 nodes on the network testing stuff out there. So it's fantastic.
Yeah. So right now there's, been about 1,600 devices shipped or something, but there's only about 631 of them online last I looked. So about a third of them are online at the moment. A lot of people are not running them because they're not earning money at the moment, but it's really great to have those on that are on right now.
Yeah. Okay, so Mary, a lot of the Holo and Holochain repos have no license information, or if they do, have AGPL as their license. Can we get some info on what license Holo uses?
I mean, I know we're really short on time, but it's a great question, and it's really time for us to kind of do an audit and kind of go through those and update them. I know a lot of the Holochain project repos already have some of this, but some of them may change. And we kind of had been waiting for the CAL to get approved, and we're still waiting for that to get updated into SPDX. I think that's one of the things Eric had said he was waiting for some of the Holochain repos. But many, if not, well, rather a few of our repos are private, they're closed source, and almost all of those are on the Holo side of things. So HP admin in particular is one of those that's not intended to be an open repo. And the reality is that we're going to have different licenses on various ones, and we've done some thinking about which ones are most appropriate. I know that we're intending to use the Apache license for a few of them. Arthur, did you want to look like you wanted to say something here?
I did, because you just said CAL, but not everybody knows what CAL is.
Oh, sorry.
So we have a cryptographic autonomy license that we actually got approved from the Open Source Institute that is designed for distributed apps, for peer-to-peer systems, with protections around people's data and in particular their keys in mind, right? And so that's our main license for Holochain, and for some of our apps and for things like that. And then for things like our libraries and mix-ins and stuff that we're totally intending for people to kind of use freely, we've been structuring those with an Apache license. And yes, we need to actually go through and audit our system. One of the things we have been waiting for, as Mary said, was to get the CAL listed in SPDX, and that way our crates, our Rust crates, can actually show that as well. And
yeah, and I checked that this morning. It's not there yet, so we haven't been able to take those final steps.
All right, final question, the one I skipped. So for non-developers that are interested in creating platform co-ops or platform cooperatives or other platform apps on Holochain, who do we turn to work with to develop our apps? What can be done to make sure non-Holochain based apps in the process of being developed can be more easily ported to Holochain? So a couple of questions there, Art.
Yeah, I mean, we've really been trying to develop some leadership in the open source community about this, as well as fostering some dev houses, if you will, that to grow their own expertise. Community has led dev trainings. We have community developed resources and apps that are showing up. There's actually a whole repo, maybe I can get a link to that put up here, where that's now the open community dev Holochain stuff. And a current HApp design course that's going in place. So we really are trying to grow community capacities so that you can have people to turn to for working on apps. But if you are building something in the meantime that you intend to take peer-to-peer, but you're starting off building it centralized, which isn't necessarily even a bad approach for things at this stage, or in general even, the strategy that works well for Holochain is to use a document-based database, not a SQL-type database, something like a MongoDB, ideally with content hashes as the keys, so you get used to actually using hashes for retrieving your data, which is how it's structured on the DHT in Holochain. And we'd even recommend as sort of a middleware layer that you try using GraphQL, because Holochains, with its links in the DHT as a graph database, and GraphQL models those types of connections pretty well. And so if you take that kind of approach where you use kind of a GraphQL middle layer to talk to the back end, then you should be able to reuse your front end code to a large degree. I mean, there's very little change that would have to happen on the front end, which is where a lot of development energy goes, just to be able to connect it up with Holochain as the backend, as a decentralized backend.
Super, thank you.
Thanks,
Art. Thanks.
Out about any of the dev houses or anything, or not right now?
No, I think I think not right now. I think because as we're wrapping up and just reminding, there are still, like, so as Art shared, you know, we had a community-run developer camp. We've got another community-run developer camp in planning for June. If you check out holo.host/events, there are still some meetups or virtual meetups and events planned across April and May. And there's also a series of pretty exciting things, 1 or 2 a month, that's happening amongst the community organizer group to start. I think there's a hackalong that's just started or is just starting. There's a couple of private teaching sessions, including this architecture course that Art mentioned. So there's quite a lot happening, some public, some behind the scenes. So please go to the website, go to the Holo host website, follow us on Twitter, go to the Holo forum or the Holochain forum, start asking questions, start getting involved, start building an app. And thank you very much for the questions. I love the questions today, and we'll be posting the daily updates. We'll be sharing what's going well, what's not going so well, and yeah, we'll be just pushing as hard as we can to the next release. So thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very much, Art. Fantastic answers. Pleasure to have you here. Thank you, everyone helping set this up and everyone watching.
Thanks, everybody.